What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of Facts on the Ground. I'm Jesse Zerwell, and I'm joined, as always, by my faithful comrade, Misty Winston. And today we are once again joined by Robbie Jaeger, who is an independent investigative journalist. He is the lead political finance reporter for MCSC Network, which you should check out if you're not already following them. You can find them on Twitter at MCSC Network. And he's been doing some really great investigative work. Last time we talked to him about the shady financials of The Intercept. And maybe we'll get to more of that today. But one of the main things we're going to talk to him about is the pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline, I guess you could call it, ironically enough, in North Carolina. So, Robbie, thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you guys for having me back on. It's this has always been this is one of my favorite places to come now. You know what I'm saying? So I'm glad you guys had me back. But yeah, nobody's talking about this story, the Colonial Pipeline spill in North Carolina. It really caught my attention, rather recently, and I figured and I thought when it first broke that it would become a nationwide story, and it just never caught on. And now it's almost like to the point of parody, because I feel like in any other situation this would be headline news, and just for some reason it's just not flashy enough to get
this
it.
This is a massive spill. I mean, it's monumental. I mean, let's start with that. How big is this spill that happened in August?
All right. So yeah, in August 2020, the Colonial Pipeline had a spill reportedly through a crack from a previously repaired spot from 2004. So initially, and this is where from the gate, this story is just kind of sketchy, right? So from the initial estimates at Colonial Pipeline, they said that they had it fully repaired within 5 days. They said that they had the pipeline shut down within minutes because this happened right outside of Charlotte, which Colonial Pipeline has an operator center, a main hub in Charlotte. So this happened literally miles away. So they said they shut down the pipeline immediately. They had it fully repaired within 5 days, and they released their first estimates of what the spill was, and it was right around 60,000 gallons. So flash forward a couple months later, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, that's a mouthful. So the NCDEQ, right? That's the EPA of North Carolina. Basically, they started seeing some numbers in Colonial Pipeline's findings. They're saying, okay, well, you guys estimated that it was 60,000, and now you guys have come out and said that you're estimating it to be about 274,000 gallons of gas, or 274,000 gallons. That was their second estimate. And then they put out a filing that said that they had recovered.
It's more than 4 times their original estimate.
Yeah, and it gets it gets worse. Yeah. It gets much worse, because soon after they revised their estimate from 60,000 to 274,000, they filed a report, and basically that report said that they had recovered about $274,000 or 274,000 gallons already. So the NCDEQ requested that they revise their estimates again, and in January they finally came back with a number of 1.2 million gallons estimated to have spilled out of this pipeline. So that my initial reaction, and this is where I came into the story, right? This is where I was initiated into when I found out, and on it, because I saw it was an AP article, right? It wasn't a very long one, because they don't really care that much, but it was basically, it was a headline. Whenever you go from 63,000 gallons to 274,000 gallons, and now you're saying it's over 1.2 million gallons, that caught my eye immediately, and that's where I latched onto this. Because that's just sketchy, right? Because even if, honestly, who's doing your math?
Right.
Even that's gross negligence on its own. Just having somebody that shitty in your, in your math department, what is happening with that? But, seriously, that, and I think that whenever you find that out, like, wow, they like almost 4 times, like they undershot their initial estimate by 2,000%. That's insane. And I can understand that estimates always grow. They always revise them in any kind of spill because you recover, certain product from the ground and you can kind of get better. But that by 2,000%, you go from 60,000 to 1.2 million. That's a pretty wide discrepancy. It's not like they said, well, it's not like they said, oh, we think it's going to be like 800,000 gallons. And then it wound up being 1.2 million. Like, that's a discrepancy, sure, but that's something that maybe you can reasonably like say, okay, they just undershot it. But that's insane, right? Just that.
Well, and something else,
by that much.
That's a huge increase. But something else I found super insane about this report that they released is that there's no like real inspections going on this pipeline. I mean, some, but like they're only looking at like let's see, like 909 miles were inspected by corrosion or metal loss tools. And then potentially there's another 909, but it could also be the same 909 that were examined by dent or deformation tools. I can't even read my own handwriting. That's terrible. And then there's the 650 miles that were examined by crack or long seam detection tools.
Right.
And this is, I mean, they have 5,602 miles of pipeline, and they're not checking this stuff. And, they're supposed to be, I think I read in your article that they're supposed to examine it or check it or whatever terminology you want to use, every 5 years. And then in the report that they put out, they're sometimes going 4, 5, even up to like 11 months past that time limit. And so it's no wonder that they have, this massive leak. They're not checking their shit. So, I mean, what the hell is going on in North Carolina?
and also, Robbie, just to add to that question for viewers who might not be familiar with this, where does the pipeline run from, and where does it run to?
All right, sure. So a lot to unpack with all this, right?
It's a big one.
So no, that's fine, because I mean, all of this is very relevant information, and it kind of all builds the case of, where I'm coming from on this, which we can circle back around to at the end. But so the pipeline itself runs through 16 states, right, including Washington, D.C. It's basically a southeast type deal, Alabama, all the way up to, I think, New York, New Jersey. Right, runs up around the southeast, the East Coast states, right? So, that's that. So it's a massive pipeline, and so going over to the inspections reports, which was that was my first, my recent article, my research that I just published, about the Colonial Pipeline, was because me. So I'm used to being a finance guy, right? I dig up filings, I look at stuff like that, and I figured there's got to be a similar way to do this with a corporation, right? So I started digging through the records filed with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is a subsect of the U.S. DOT. And they basically had a trove of records filed by themselves and filed with them by Colonial. And some of these were annual inspection reports. Now, the 2020 inspection report is due in June. So by then, we'll know a little bit more about the most recent inspections. But when I looked at the 2019 inspection report, as Misty referenced, so it's kind of staggering. So I'm pulling up the numbers too. So yes, 909 miles, and you're right, it's 5,602 miles from start to finish. Right, that's how long the pipeline is. I believe the number was like 700 and close to 707 miles, I think, run through North Carolina.
In North Carolina, yeah.
So it's 707 miles in North Carolina. Now, here's the thing about these reports before I start digging into these numbers. There is no specification on what stretches of pipe were checked, right? And it doesn't also specify if the same piece of pipe was checked with different tools, right? So they could be doubling up on these numbers, right? So the first two were both not exactly 909 miles, 0.01, right? And those were miles that were checked by corrosion or metal loss tools and dent or deformation tools. Now, common sense led me to believe that even being down to the 100th place decimal exact, to me that says that it was checked by the same piece of equipment that functioned in two different ways, right? I just feel like that's the common conclusion. So from their maximum total they reported, I don't count that 909 both times because you really only checked it once. You just checked it with a tool that checks for two different things, if that makes any sense. So at most they only checked 45% of their entire pipeline. But again, that's a top end number. The low end number would be somewhere around like 983 miles, which is absurdly low. I think it's likely closer to the high end number, right? But there's no way to know. And this is like, just add that into your little mental piggy bank of reasons why this is a bigger story than it, or this should be a bigger story than it is. So, and then again, like I said, the crack itself, the 1.2 million gallon crack being the key word, they only checked 650 miles of their pipeline in 2019 for cracks. Okay. And then when you look back at the 2018 report, that number is even more pathetic. In 2018, they only reported checking 146 miles of their entire pipeline.
And again, this is a pipeline that is 5,602 miles long.
Yes.
Basically, the length of going across the United States, if not more.
Oh, it's a major pipeline.
Right.
So you've checked grand total from January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2019. They checked the grand total of like 860 some odd miles, or like 900 miles total. Or I don't know, 650. So it's like 800 miles total of their pipeline for cracks. That's 14%. It doesn't specify which 14% it was. So I don't know how many unique miles were even checked. Like, these could be checked twice. I mean, there's no kind of specificity at all. But the problem is with me, I find this point to be quite obvious. It's hard to find cracks in your pipeline if you're not checking for them.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's what comes to my mind first. Right. It's a common sense thing. If you're only checking like barely 10% of your pipeline, in some cases only 3% of your pipeline for cracks in a year, and how are you supposed to be surprised when a crack appears? You didn't look for one.
Well, and I think that we should also mention that this pipeline is particularly in North Carolina, which, as we said, there's 707 miles in North Carolina of this Colonial Pipeline. But so 624 miles of that 707 was built before 1980. So this is 88% of this pipeline that goes through North Carolina that's over 40 years old, and they're not checking them for cracks. That seems pretty silly.
That was the next thing. That was the next thing I was going to say, is that not only is this a super long pipeline, right, and it's very, the East Coast is very dependent. Where I live in the Southeast, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, these states are heavily dependent on the Colonial Pipeline, even Virginia and in parts north. I felt like back in 2016, the name Colonial Pipeline is very familiar to all of us. It's on the tip of our tongues whenever we think about pipeline stuff, but it's not as flashy as Keystone. It's not as flashy as Dakota Access, right? So we don't think about it. But
I would say more ironically named, though, Colonial.
Well, yeah, because it's going right through the colonies.
Right.
Really, I mean, honestly, but in 2016 in Birmingham, Alabama, there was a massive explosion on the pipeline during a repair.
Yeah.
It killed 3 people.
That
was Colonial's pipeline.
I looked that up because I didn't remember that. Like, when I was reading your article, I was like, oh my gosh, so I looked that up, and as soon as I read the article from the 2016 explosion, I was like, okay, yeah, now I remember this. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a huge pipeline.
Yeah. It's a huge pipeline, but it's old. It's extremely old. Right. And that's the thing, as Missy said, just the portion that runs through North Carolina itself, over 88% of the pipeline is more than 40 years old. Right. So, I mean, I don't know about you. But I feel like you should be inspecting these things thoroughly, right? Not just the bare minimum. And another thing, as far as Colonial, like they've their massive history. I'm gonna run through some stats real quick that I found from Fox
Sure.
46 in Charlotte. It since 2000, there were between 2000 and the end of 2019. So the last 20 years, give or take, 2,751 pipeline spills in the United States. 272 of those spills were connected to Colonial Pipeline. So that's almost 10% of every pipeline spill in the last 20 years can be connected to the Colonial Pipeline. In that same amount of time, there's been 38 spills in North Carolina, and 32 of those spills have been connected to the Colonial Pipeline. Now that can be said, well, because Colonial Pipeline is probably the biggest one that runs through there. Fair enough. But that's the problem. Like these guys have had over the last since the beginning of 2017, Colonial Pipeline has had at least 60 incidents reported with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Act, and they've incurred like $58 million in property damage since that time. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
insane.
over $24 million of that property
And
damage total is
that's
stemming
just since
from the
2017.
yeah, that's just since 2017. That doesn't stretch back to 2000 like that stat I just read before.
Yeah,
That's
that's
60
crazy.
incidents.
$58 million. Oh my
Yeah, and
God.
they average like 3 incidents every 2 months.
Mm.
Or I'm sorry, 3 incidents every 2 years. Uh and
Still a
that's
lot.
insane. And yet nobody is talking about any kind of punishment or so the status of this is, and look, I've kind of been working behind the scenes with a local news station in Charlotte, trying to, helping them find information and, just, sharing what we have, because at this point, you know, the selfishness of journalists, like trying to make a name for yourself thing, kind of takes a back seat whenever you really understand, like there's a multi-million-dollar Coke owned corporation, you know what I'm saying, that has absolutely zero accountability whatsoever. And, no, I mean, they might end up having to pay a fine in the end of this, but there's zero public pressure, right?
Right.
They don't fear the citizens of Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, right? Colonial Pipeline doesn't give a shit. They're not afraid of them. There's not any powerful politicians or activist groups breathing down their neck as they
Right.
should be. Right. There's no news outlets, pushing these stories as they should be. There's nobody reporting on it. So Colonial is just kind of like, okay, we can just kind of do what we want when we want, And as Misty said, referencing those like the delayed inspections. So there, Colonial has pipelines that run underneath of navigable waterways. And those sections of pipe, like all sections of pipe, and this is a problem too. The regulation is that your pipe needs to be checked only once every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two ways and Colonial has said in a statement responding to our article that you know that they follow that regulation, that they inspect their stuff once every 5 years at least. And there's two ways to think about that, right? So you either think you literally check your entire pipeline one time every 5 years, which to me the conversation becomes a little bit less about Colonial and a little bit more about the regulators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just pathetic if that's your regulation. Or you can inspect the entire pipeline on a rolling basis over the course of 5 years. In
Right.
which case, you need to be documenting, even though this isn't regulation, but you should have to document what stretches of pipe you inspected. There's zero
Yeah.
accountability in any of these filings, and it's a failure on Colonial Pipeline. It's a failure on the Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Materials, or Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and to a certain extent, I mean, the North Carolina DEQ, they're doing what they can. They're demanding information from Colonial Pipeline. They just sent something called a comprehensive site assessment, to which the DEQ has to approve that Colonial has given them sufficient information in which they can move forward in the case. But honestly, as a regulatory authority, the DEQ is hardly something to be feared.
Right.
So
Yeah.
unless the I've sent questions out to the EPA to ask if they had if the Colonial Pipeline was on their radar, if they
Mhm.
were thinking about getting involved or anything like that. I haven't heard anything from the EPA. I've initiated a FOIA request with the NCDEQ to get all the filings that Colonial Pipeline has filed with them since January 1st of 2019, and any kind of internal publicly available per FOIA request, internal documents, memorandums, evaluations, or anything like that of Colonial Pipeline by the DEQ, because I want to know what they've been saying, because how can you monitor this kind of, basically to me, negligence over years and years, seeing the same entity have all of these incidents over and over and over, uh, and just watch it and basically not put any pressure on them whatsoever. Like those
Well, and
waterway, yeah,
there's no accountability either. It's like usually, like occasionally there's a fine when it's so big that they can't really just kind of give them a slap on the wrist and move on. But for the most part,
right,
it's like, oh, we'll give you 30 days to fix whatever it is that you weren't doing. And
Mhm.
then they let it go. And
yeah,
obviously that's not working.
It's
You
like
know what I
it's
mean?
like it's like the BP spill in the Gulf. Essentially what they got was a slap on the wrist financially, and look, BP gas stations abound, and they really haven't lost any revenue or business from destroying a major body of water, a marine ecosystem.
sure.
So, but one thing I want to ask you, Robbie, is what are these pipelines typically made of? What's the material? Because we hear about pipelines, Dakota Access, for example, and they always seem to be so fickle. They always seem to break in some way. What materials are they using to make these?
Well, I mean, it's usually just some kind of welded steel. They're usually coated. It's, in some kind of, I mean, I can't really technically describe it because I'm not a pipeline engineer.
Mhm.
But, I can say that one thing Colonial Pipeline likes to say and put out there is that, oh, well, we have all of this coated pipeline. It's all coated and secure. Um, but the problem is, again, is that, that coating can corrode.
Mhm.
And they are barely checking any of it for corrosion. So how do you know your coating is good? Quite honestly, most of their pipeline is, I'm pulling up the report right now because I think it actually specifies what it is made out of.
Well, I mean, I think it probably varies too because you have some of these that are 40 years old. So, I mean, that's probably different from what like newer, what are making it out of
So
now. Like the
it's
coating's probably
steel.
different.
It's
Yeah.
steel. It's just, yeah, it's steel. They're still pipes. And most of the pipe for Colonial is coated. Um, let's see, it's
And when you
electric
say,
resistance
can you
welded.
just clarify what you mean when you say coated?
Basically, it's just got a sleeve around it that protects it from, lightning damage and, just outside
Right.
elements. It's just that extra tough skin, right?
Yeah,
Protected from the elements, basically.
like a
Um,
varnish.
right,
Yeah.
right. But the problem is that, again, they're not checking it as much as they should be for a pipe that's 40 years old and made of
Yeah.
steel and buried in large portions in the ground and underneath of the waterways. Like Misty said, those waterway inspections in several different states were going 5, 6, 10, or 11 months past inspection, and nobody fined them. They just basically wrote them a strongly worded letter and told them to get their shit together. you
Right.
Yeah.
know and which gives Colonial absolutely zero incentive to give a damn about any of that. And also, I found in the report as well that this was something that was submitted because the PHMSA, I always fuck that up.
That's a
um, it
lot.
is. So
Yeah.
the PHMSA actually did a year-long inspection of Colonial Pipeline, um, and found, among other things, they have been ignoring a lot of procedural stuff. But one of them really jumped out to me because it was like they cited, or they didn't cite them. I should specify. They wrote to them in their strongly worded letter. They warned them, right,
Hmm.
that Colonial Pipeline wasn't even maintaining corrosion inspection records correctly. They weren't.
Hmm.
manually. They weren't keeping their records correctly. So even if they are inspecting their stuff, if they're not indicating that they're doing the correct amount of record keeping and keeping the correct catalog of information, how are we supposed to know? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's so many problems. And I think that, this is on its way to becoming, because I would not be as surprised at all if Colonial revises these estimates again in the future. Um, or if the DEQ, in response to Colonial's latest filing, requests that they do it again. There's really no telling how it's going to go, but it's going to be, when it's all said and done, the largest pipeline spill in United States history, and nobody is talking about it. Colonial Pipeline, as reported by another local channel around Charlotte, they've already had to buy at least 3 people out of their homes, um, just because of the cleanup effort. It's
Mm.
going to encroach on their land, and they're going to have to dig up so much soil, because that's the other thing about the spill. It's not flashy, right? It's not like Colonial's own spill back in 1996 into the Reedy River in South
Mhm.
Carolina, where they fucked up like a 3 mile stretch of water, or like something longer than that, and they killed like a whole bunch of fish. Like, it was crazy. They spilled a bunch of oil into the river, right?
Yeah.
Or like you mentioned earlier, the Gulf spill,
Hmm.
right? Uh, so the thing about the Colonial Pipeline spill in North Carolina is that there is no indication yet that any drinking water has been contaminated, right?
Okay.
So it's just going to be groundwater, and obviously the property, like, because so these soils are now saturated with gasoline, right? So
Yeah.
even if they weren't on an easement, but the repair is going to be drills. There's going to be excavations galore. It's going to be a complete ordeal, right?
Well, this is
And
already
Yeah.
the largest spill in North Carolina history, right? Like this
absolutely,
is
by
already,
far.
I mean, so this is, I mean, to me, it's amazing that this isn't a bigger story. That this isn't like some, and you're right, it's not flashy, but where's Sunrise Movement? Where's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Or, where are these people at? Where's Ed Markey? They're the Green New Deal people. Why is nobody talking about the fact that this is the largest oil spill in North Carolina history and likely to be the largest oil spill when it's all said and done in the United States history? Where is everybody? Is anybody
Well,
talking about it in North Carolina? I mean, I know you said a
Well,
couple local stations are.
AOC's been making selfie videos about almost being murdered, so
Right.
gotta
Yeah,
cut. We gotta
she's
cut
been
her a
busy.
break
but see,
there.
but that's the thing. This happened in August. There was
Right.
Yeah.
still there was still a whole election cycle going on, and they
That was
still didn't care.
that was one of
That's
the
the
most that was one of the most surprising things to me. Just reading your tweets initially, it seemed like, okay, this happened a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, but no, it happened way back in August, and there's been, besides you and maybe some local reporting, there's been zero word of it.
Nothing.
Well,
Yeah.
here's the thing: is that, um, I don't blame like I said, people not hearing about it. It's twofold, right? It's
Hmm.
a problem at first. You didn't hear about it because 60,000 gallons doesn't sound like a big deal,
Right.
right? So that's on Colonial, right?
Yeah.
And then you didn't hear about it, but the news of it breaking of to 1.2 million gallons, that broke a month ago, and you still haven't heard about it, right?
Right.
So that, I feel like, is a problem. And it's a failure. It's disappointing, like, quite honestly. I mean, because you're expecting, like, hey, this is like the biggest. This is like, even if you didn't catch up to it until the 1.2 million estimate came out, that's massive. The discrepancies are massive. And nobody from the so-called progressive left is even talking about this at all. No, I mean, no, the president obviously could care less, right?
Right.
But
Hmm.
the people that say are the ones that they're supposed to care, the Bernie Sanders of the world, the AOCs, the squad. When I'd say that, I mean, literally, I'm extending out to Ro Khanna, Cory Bush, and Jamal Bowman as well. Like, basically
Hmm.
every Justice Democrat. Sunrise Movement, which I'm not surprised, right? Because there's
No.
nothing politically to be gained, because North Carolina is a red state. And I think that honestly has a lot to do with it. I mean, yeah, I think we're more of a purple state. We consistently elect Democratic governors, but we consistently elect Republican presidents and
Mhm.
Republican senators, but we select Democratic congressmen. We're ass backwards. I get it, right? But we're not a West Coast flashy, like we're North Carolina. Like there's nothing interesting about North Carolina,
Well,
quite honestly.
you're not part of, and I don't mean this as an insult. I mean it as a compliment. If anything, you're not part of the coastal liberal elite.
Sure.
So
No, yeah, that's totally it. And that is, trust me, it's not an insult. I mean, I've grown up in North Carolina, born and raised, right, my entire life.
I'm
I
in New
live closer
Jersey,
to
so
Raleigh than I do
we're not elite
to.
either.
But no, like I've grown up closer to Raleigh than I am to Charlotte,
Okay.
right? But I feel like this affects everyone, right? Because even if, okay, yeah, well, a whole bunch of fish didn't die and not a whole bunch of people's water was poisoned, um, we have a really big problem in this country. We've got pipelines that are running everywhere. What looking at a pipeline map of the United States
Mm.
is crazy, right?
Mhm.
And
It's like looking at a map of the West Bank and trying to justify to yourself like there's nothing wrong here, like no colonization going on.
yeah, but the thing is that these pipelines, look, if this little stretch of pipeline, this Colonial Pipeline is so beat up, right? And so decrepit and so old, what's going on with the rest of them, right?
Right.
If Colonial Pipeline, if their bare minimum regulation that they have to comply with is only checking their pipeline once every 5 years. So the next time Colonial Pipeline gets a checkup, it'll be 45, right?
Mm.
Or 50. And of course we're going to have multi-million gallon spills in the interim because nobody's checking them, right? And I understand that the last time this pipeline got shut down, gas prices in the southeast or all up the East Coast skyrocketed. That was after the Birmingham explosion, right?
Mhm.
Uh, I feel like we all remember the East Coast gas shortage, right?
Yeah.
We might not remember the
Mhm.
pipeline explosion, but we definitely remember the gas shortage, right? In its aftermath. And sadly, that's the catch-22 of the Colonial Pipeline specifically. The macro problem, right, is that in a perfect world, I would say no pipelines, right?
Mhm.
In a realistic world, I would say no new pipelines. Okay. Um, because I understand, as much as I think that they are a blight on the environment and that we should be spending every possible dollar and resource finding new sustainable energy that doesn't involve any kind of fossil fuel or gasoline or oil sands or anything. Like there has got to be a better way. We have got like a billionaire that can build a rocket ship and fly to the moon commercially, but we can't figure out how to run a car off of anything other than gasoline and ethanol, and I feel that's disgusting, right? But
Yeah.
I also realize that the oil economy, literally, without it, and that's why, like it all, of course, all roads lead to capitalism in the end,
Yeah.
correct? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because the oil market makes the world go round, right? And we know this, and without the oil market, uh, economies and entire countries and nations would collapse. That's the unfortunate side effect of when we talk about eliminating the oil industry, the oil and gas industry. There has to be something there to supplant it, right? There's got to be something coming in behind it, which is why we need the new renewables, right? The new stuff, like stuff that we haven't thought of yet, because obviously if we had thought of it yet, we'd be using it.
Right.
And so that's but as far as North Carolina goes, we're if they shut down Colonial Pipeline, it would be like $6-7 a gallon gas.
Mm.
If it was for any extended amount of time, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? We can't even get the money that we were promised by our government. Like we're being straight up lied to, which we all. I mean, we knew that we were going to get lied to. Politicians lie.
Right.
Joe Biden is a fucking documented liar and a documented flip flopper, right? But I mean,
Pathological.
so we knew that, but damn, like we didn't realize that you were just going to straight up lie to us about this $2,000 shit. And we're fighting over a one-time payment
Well,
too. That's
it
the crazy
it,
shit
it
too.
yeah, well, we know it's going to happen, but it doesn't really hit until it hits. And when it hits hard. And
Yeah. I mean, but we couldn't.
That's what we're experiencing
if
now.
that's what, but where we're at now is that we couldn't. If it had to shut down for any long period of time, things would just be. It would be catastrophic. And that's the thing, like, too, about this little stimulus. Not to get too far off subject, but like, we don't really know how bad stuff is, right? Like, oh, everybody seems to be doing fine without us giving them much of anything, right? They're living off that $600 bullshit, right? Until a pipeline explosion, happens, and then it jacks up gas prices till $10 a gallon or whatever. And now what?
Right.
Now you start to really see where you're at as far as, oh, are they really okay? Because it's not just okay. It's just not just good enough to be able to live, to survive barely in times when there are no problems. You need to be able to survive in a time when there is problems, or else the institutions that were meant to protect you have failed you.
Yeah. And I think that's why this story is so important too, is because it's such a crucial vein in the economic body, if you will, of the U.S., which is, I think we can all agree, rapidly deteriorating, has been since 2008 and arguably even before then. And like you said, Robbie, oil has so much to do with it. And with this, these sort of pipeline failures, these breakdowns, it's a crucial aspect of, what we're all looking at in terms of trying to solve whatever social problems we have. And so how much of it, you mentioned the Koch brothers earlier, are they involved with this? And if not, who is sort of the top brass behind Colonial?
So Colonial is its own company, but it's weird how these pipeline projects go, right? So pipeline projects are usually joint ventures, and Colonial Pipeline is no different. Basically, Colonial Pipeline is its own company that was built or paid for, funded by Koch Industries. They're the majority owners. At the time, Marathon Oil was involved. They've since sold their share to Koch Industries. Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, is the other majority owners in the pipeline. And of course, there's a bunch of private investors that have pulled their funds together through like Colonial Enterprises LLC, right?
And
so,
I just want to point out that Shell, when it was, well, I think it still is immersed in Nigeria, but they are responsible for hiring death squads to kill, among other activists, Ken Saro-Wiwa. So Shell it's a company with blood on its hands.
These are all shady ass motherfuckers who do not care about anything but profit. And that's what I was just going to say, that, we have these, if we lived in like a sane country, and if we lived in a sane country, you're right, Robbie, we wouldn't have any pipelines. But if we lived in a sane country that was still like trying to figure a way to get off of fossil fuels or whatever, we would live in a country that forced these pipelines to do legitimate checks, and that would not allow them to have pipelines that were 40 fucking years old, right, and allow them to go 5 years without checking them like this. And we would have a system in place where if something like this happened, that there was a method of taking care of people who were the most affected by it. So the people of North Carolina would be able to get some kind of a stimulus to help them deal with the increased gas prices or whatever it is. But we don't live in the same country. We live in a country that values profit only and not people at all. I mean, this is, right, it's ridiculous.
And that's the most heartbreaking part about the conversation that we're having, is that, and that kind of references what, Jesse said too, is that there's nothing we can really do about it. At like looking at present moment right now, the oil industry it's as big as it's ever been. Don't let anybody tell you anything otherwise. Colonial Pipeline itself made like $530 some million in profit in just the first 9 months of 2020. They made like $537 million. I saw an article from Forbes, or it was either Forbes or Fortune. I hate getting them mixed up, but it was one of those two. It's from 2016, but they were estimating that Koch Industries make like $85 million a year from the Colonial Pipeline. The CEO of Royal Dutch Shell. Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
the CEO of Royal Dutch Shell, Nichols. I can't remember his first name. His last name is Nichols. He is the chairman of the board of directors of Colonial Pipeline. So Shell is very much involved, very much
Mhm.
involved. And like Misty, you're right. Like I said, if these regulations are a joke, and I think that's the other side of the coin that we're finding out with the Colonial investigation is that it's not just Colonial Pipeline barely if it, barely meeting their bare minimum requirements to report, if that, and in some cases not even being able to do that. um because I just need to see somebody show me the math on how I'm inspecting. It's got to, how do you inspect a pipeline over the course of 5 years and you're only checking 10% a year, even at even at that, like that pace. Like I've checked 10% of my pipeline for cracks every year over this 5 year period. You've still only checked barely over half of it for cracks. How is that complying with regulations? um and so it's just the whole thing is Colonial. So I want to know personally, if I had to have any kind of trove of documents at all, right? If I'm on my journalist wish list right now, it's, I need to see some emails,
Mhm.
right? I want
Yeah.
to know, like, I just want to know, was like how, what was the response like in the
Right.
situation, right?
The
Were they,
internal communications and
yeah, I mean, yeah,
manipulations.
If
I
you
mean,
work at Colonial and you want to blow some whistle, let's
yeah,
do
hit
that
me up.
thing.
Look, my DMs are open on Twitter, and you can always get my email, like, straight up.
Yeah.
But even as may, like, I don't want to go out and out and accuse of a cover up. But I can think I might not meet the dictionary or the legal definition of negligence, but they've been neglecting this pipeline, and
Right.
60 incidents over the last 3 years. That's insane, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so,
I don't think it's a cover up. From my reading, they're just
well, it's not
of the
necessarily,
They
I
mind.
don't
We
want to
just
can
say
don't
we we
care.
cover
can do
up, but I
whatever
want to
we
see
can do
like the
whatever the hell we
downplay.
want.
Like, how do you get from 60,000 to 1.2 million, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I feel like there's something that doesn't sit right about that with me, right?
Yeah.
That's what got me into the story. But going on further, like I said, Keystone, yeah, that got shut down, but the Supreme Court essentially had killed that already. We kind of dodged a bullet in North Carolina recently. The activists finally won one in North Carolina, and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline project was shut down. Duke Energy and Dominion Energy sold their oil and gas stakes off to Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, and we kind of got spared a little bit with that. But
So
what
they
happens?
so they they moved on.
Right, right. But see, but what
Sorry,
happens when the
dad
Enbridge
joke.
system breaks out, right? What happens when the Enbridge system that covers like almost half of the middle America, basically, it runs from Canada all the way down. What happens when, you know, Dakota Access, inevitably messes up, right? You know what I mean? Like, what
Well,
happens to the
that's the
rest?
thing. It's
Right.
not a question of if these things
It's
will
what
fail. It's
when.
just when. They
Yes.
are, I mean, they're failing all over the place. I mean, I think that there's like the federal regulation is they don't even have to like report it if it's not over a certain number. So this stuff's like seeping out all the time and they don't have to report it because it's not like a major amount. So, I mean, it really is just a question of when is this stuff going to like a massive,
And
I
what's the
mean,
next
this
one
is
going to be?
massive.
1.5? But what happens whenever this pipeline or any other pipeline? What happens whenever it spills its next 1.2 million gallons into the Mississippi River or
Mhm.
the Missouri River, right? What happens then? What happens when, you know, one of the, late one of these giant, one of the I'm not from the West Coast, but like, what happens when a giant body of water over in the West Coast, gets, leaked, a bunch of gasoline and oil into it? Because I bet you somebody's going to care then when it happens in California, right? If this pipeline spill happened in New York, uh, it would be all over the news, right?
Right.
There would be politicians because it directly affects their constituents. I'm sorry, they may not have cared at first on first estimates, but you know what? They also like are supposed to be there, uh, holding corporations accountable, right?
Hmm.
That's what we need to see from our politicians. Now, am I surprised? No, right? Because Sunrise Movement isn't The Sunrise Movement doesn't care because Sunrise Movement can't fundraise off of this. AOC doesn't care because it's not popular. If this thing got traction in the news cycles on a national scale, if it was running on the lead on CNN or MSNBC, AOC would be on this in a heartbeat. And both of you guys know exactly that. You know I'm right.
Yeah,
You know I'm right. But since
exactly.
it hasn't been approved as like a major story, then she's not going to make it a major story. She's got other stuff to do, right?
I
She's got to
I doubt
find
she even
wherever the hype train is
I,
going.
I doubt she even
Yes,
knows
that's
about it.
exactly it.
But that's the
No.
thing, though, is that you're supposed to be in tune with not only, you know, progressive politics in general, but you call yourself somebody that like you claim ownership over this version of the Green New Deal. Practically, you call yourself an environmentalist. Where are you when the largest pipeline spill in U.S. history happens? You're nowhere.
Yeah.
Neither are any of your colleagues. Neither are any of the groups that you endorsed or that endorsed you that call them. And it's not just Sunrise Movement. It's Greenpeace. It's 350.org. It's
Hmm.
Bill McKibben, the guy that founded that. It's the League of Conservation Voters. It's Sierra Club hasn't tweeted about Colonial Pipeline since they exploded in 2016.
Has
So
Greta
like
has Greta
where
Thunberg
are you
said
guys?
anything?
Yeah, where's Greta
No,
Thunberg?
no,
What's
I
the Green
haven't seen
Party? Has the
anything
Green Party said anything?
that I
Has the
don't
Green
know.
Party said
But like,
anything?
but that's the thing. Like, where are the because somebody said this is the first time because I tweeted about it and I've been on a tweet storm about it because I'm trying to raise awareness and I'm trying to get people to understand like look, just because a bunch of waterways weren't poisoned doesn't mean this isn't a story, right? The story is look at how shitty of a job Colonial has been doing in inspecting their pipes, right? And look how shitty a job the regulators have been doing on making sure that these pipelines are safe. It
Hmm.
should be an eye-opening conversation piece happening right now. We need to overhaul the regulation system so that companies like Colonial can't get away with neglecting their pipeline for 5, 6, 7, 8 years or however. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
this is a double prong. This should be a huge story. You know, and I'm not just saying that because I'm reporting on it, but because it's like there has to be some kind of accountability. There needs to be some kind of public pressure from the people we put there. Like, look, again, Bernie Sanders, Green New Deal, Green New Deal. We have to
Hmm.
get off fossil fuels. Where is he? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, he kind of stopped talking about
He's
that
making
since Biden got
excuses.
elected.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
about to say the last time I saw Bernie Sanders was a clip from yesterday where he was saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to get you the $2,000 checks. That's 600 plus
And the
1,400, right?"
14, yeah.
So
He's
instead of
not gonna.
actually, yeah, he's too busy, you know, caping for Joe Biden and covering his ass. Um,
And
and
wearing
it's a
mittens.
shame. Yeah,
I mean, the
okay. I
dude
mean,
went
yeah,
from talking about Medicare for all religiously to now saying expanding healthcare. He doesn't even say Medicare for all anymore. He just says we're going to expand healthcare.
you
So
know,
he's changed his rhetoric and everything across the board. It's embarrassing to watch.
Yeah.
He
it's
is
so
ridiculous.
ugh,
I
it's
mean,
frustrating.
Robbie, that brings up the question for me. And I'm sure Misty, you'd probably have the same question, but you were just saying that we need to hold these politicians accountable. How likely or how possible do you think that it is, given what we've seen from, like we were just
Public pressure
talking
does
about?
work.
Okay.
So
I mean, it has to be a lot. Like for them to care, it has to be a lot of people in their face.
yes.
Right.
So
You have to make it uncomfortable for them to not talk about it. Like
Hmm.
it
be
has to be big
careful.
enough.
It might
Yeah,
hurt AOC's
uncomfortable.
feelings.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be violent. I'm
That was
sorry. I'm
No.
violent.
sorry. That
That
was
was
No.
violent.
violent. I'm sorry. That was violence. But yeah, that's literally what it takes, though. That's what I talk about with
Yeah.
Assange all the time. Is it has to be millions of people like demanding that they speak.
It just
Or
Basically,
it just seems to
or
me
it
though
could
that
just be one
that's not enough
person.
anymore. Like politicians, that doesn't pressure them anymore. But I'm interested, Robbie, in
Well,
what you think about that.
I feel like it depends on the politician. Like, do I honestly believe that, um, like back in the day, I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of Jesse Helms.
Oh yeah.
Super fucking racist dude from,
Mm.
of course, from my state, right?
I was
Uh,
always happy to share
Congressman for forever.
his first name.
But oh God, sorry. But do I really ever think that he ever gave a fuck about what anybody ever thought of him? Absolutely not. Do I think that, say, like Richard Blumenthal, right? He's a senator from God, Massachusetts, I want to say. I could be wrong. Nope, not Massachusetts. Maybe. Whatever. He's
I don't know.
he doesn't care. He's a super rich dude. Doesn't give a shit. Yeah. I'll probably use Dianne Feinstein. There's another one. There's a good one. Right.
Yeah.
Do I honestly think Dianne Feinstein or say Nancy Pelosi, do they give a shit about what people think of them? Not really. And they give a fuck about what their corporate billionaire donors think of them. That's about as far as that goes, right? They don't care about what the peons think. You can pressure an AOC. I really do think you can. Now, I want to add the caveat that I believe that the pressure is you can pressure her to make a statement on Twitter, right? And that might be as far as your statement goes. But here's the thing. AOC, a statement from AOC on Twitter has more power than anything I could ever write in my entire life, right? Which is where I'm coming from on this whole they have to say something.
Which is
because
also the totality of the problem, that you putting out a story with these facts about material reality will have, and again, no offense to your work, but
no, of course not,
far less traction than a tweet by AOC. There's something problematic about that needs to be addressed.
Every tweet is viral. Right? If she were to, she wouldn't even have to tweet out my work specifically. She could just tweet out something about it. And if she did, it'd be 300,000 likes within like a few hours, and everybody across America would be talking about the Colonial. Everybody would be rushing to find something to read or educate
it would
themselves
likely
about
be picked up by media too. I mean, because when she tweets, people like to cover her tweets, and which is ridiculous, but that's the world we live in. And she could tweet, and not only does it then get millions of eyes on the story just from Twitter alone, she has millions of Twitter followers, but then the media is gonna maybe, I mean, is it likely? No, because they're also owned by a lot of these oil companies, and they don't want it really to get out either. But it's more likely that they will cover it if she tweets about it than if she does not. And so that's the problem here, is that these politicians have this massive power. Like AOC could organize a general strike tomorrow. Like she could like start working on that on Twitter with her huge following tomorrow, and she could get that done. She chooses to not do that. She chooses to not tweet about this story. She chooses to not tweet about Assange or any of the other issues that she claims to care about. I mean, that's the problem. And so it really is going to take a massive amount of pressure, whether it's on Twitter or whether people go do a sit-in at her office or whatever. Don't be violent. But yeah, I mean, that's the world we live in, where, these people who claim to care about these issues have to be pressured to do the right thing. It's amazing.
No, yeah. I mean, that sums it up. They're supposed to be the champions of these issues, and they either don't even know about the problem, which I'm sorry, I know you're a busy politician, but how do people not know about this? It's the largest pipeline spill in U.S. history. How is it not being covered by the media? How is it not being covered by politicians that are supposed to be, on this type of stuff? Even if you're a politician and you got a billion other things going on, right?
You have a staff.
Where are the environmental activist groups? This is what you literally do all day long, every day of the week. You monitor environmental policy, you monitor environmental crises, and stuff like that. And this hasn't come up on your radar. What I just don't understand. Is it because nobody was, no fish were killed or no waterways were poisoned, so no harm, no foul? No, definitely still screwed up the environment. Right. This is definitely still something that environmentalists need to care about. The cleanup is going to push people out of their homes. It already has. Like you said, like I'm saying, the estimated property damage as of right now is over $24 million and climbing. This pipeline has done almost $60 million of damage in the last 3 years. And this is, they need, I would be okay if they sat in front of Congress, except I don't think Congress obviously doesn't give a shit. I mean, I just saw a stack. I mean, there's the oil company investments on the Republican side or crazy. I just saw Tom Hollingsworth. I forgot his first name. He's from Indiana, I think. Yeah, he's a congressman from Indiana. He just bought like another $200,000 worth of another pipeline company that runs pipelines through Texas called Enterprise Products. And like the Marathon is invested. Dude, like these companies, like, and not just that. And just kind of wraps back around to my other work that I usually do, is that a lot of these congressmen and these senators have investments specifically, but not totally limited to the Republican side, right? Like more likely it's going to be Republican, but there are Democrats with oil company investments, but they're invested monetarily with their stocks, with their pensions, with their 401ks, or sometimes just even directly, like Nancy Pelosi just goes out and buys $500,000 worth of CrowdStrike or $1 million worth of Apple whenever she feels
Or
like it.
Tesla, because
Or
she knows
Tesla.
Joe Biden's about to switch to all electric. That's
Right.
fucked up.
But still, how are you? And it's a broader issue. How are you supposed to be trusted to objectively regulate companies that you have financial ties to, or even in the form of investments? Why would I want to put Exxon through a 2-year bad news cycle by running them in front of Congress up and down the flagpole? Whenever I've got like $500,000 invested in stock in there, or I've got my 401k, I know has got like a large portion of that is tied up in an oil and gas index fund with Vanguard or BlackRock or one of these other, mega financial institutions that just abuse all of these regulations to begin with, literally the institutions that profit off of everything, no matter what happens. If it goes up or it goes down, BlackRock is making money off of it. And in the end, we're the ones left holding the bag because nobody's going to regulate them. Nobody's going to really take them seriously. They only do these things when they absolutely have to, like when there is no other choice. Like, okay, dude, we have to punish you. Like we have to. Otherwise they'll just we'll hit them with a fine, and then that'll be the last you hear of it. And
Yeah,
it's sad, man.
And let's not be coy here. These corporations calculate the risk of what they're doing beforehand, and they almost always figure out very quickly that it's cheaper to commit a crime than it is to not commit the crime if there's profit involved. And we've seen this, and I want to point out too, before I forget, that this isn't just confined to the U.S. We've seen Chevron destroy a large part of Ecuador, for example. There's a very good documentary about that called Crude, which was directed by Joe Berlinger, who did the Paradise Lost series, the trilogy about the West Memphis Three.
Yes, love that.
Yeah.
I'm a true crime nerd, so that's my jam.
So it's easy to focus on just this pipeline because, first of all, you're talking about the length. It's huge. And the possibilities of destroying nature from that size of a pipeline, it's almost like a doomsday experience. But I think we need to realize that this is multinational on behalf of the U.S. It's not, Chevron is not an Ecuadorian company. Chevron is an American company. And again, anybody who doesn't know, I encourage you to watch that documentary Crude. But you see how just rapaciously they're willing to destroy the environment for profit, and then if it's what they have to do, they'll just walk away with, like you said, a fine that doesn't amount to anything really.
Right. Yeah. And
I wanted to ask you though, are there any, you said I know that there's no like fish that died. Are there any, I know North Carolina's got farmland. Is there any like farmland that's been affected by this or anything like that? I mean, is it like what? There's got to be some other kinds of damage that they're looking at other than residential.
It's definitely going to be quite a lot of cleanup from the grounds, right? So they're probably, what's going to happen is that in the surrounding area, and I dropped my phone, right? But there is there is a certain radius that they cover, right, from the incident site, right, and in that radius, like that was part what I was mentioning about them buying out those properties of those homeowners having to move, because basically what they're going to do in this area is just basically dig up, churn. They're basically going to churn the ground, and try to reclaim as much of that gasoline as possible. Um, so that's going to involve drilling, excavation, a whole type of, kind of filtration process that they use, a bunch of, high tech mumbo jumbo. But I mean, that's basically what they're going to go through. I don't know. So I'm not sure if any like specific farmland was damaged, but yeah, the actual, there was straight up, I mean, there was massive damage to the earth, like to the ground, to the area. And like, okay, so there's like, there's that one thing of saying like there was damage to me because people had to leave their homes and they won't be able to go back because, of a pipeline spill, whether or not, they spilled it like literally in their backyard or not. That pipeline spill has forced these people to leave their homes, and they'll never be able to go back. Right. So there's that. Even if they got their house bought from them, like eminent domain, that type of shit doesn't make you feel any better, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you
Doesn't give you a home, another
right,
home.
and it's also not like, oh, it's okay, I just got eminent domain. It's not like they kicked me
Yeah.
out of my house or anything.
Right.
But of course, it still sucks. And they shouldn't have had to do that because of a company's negligence on inspecting their pipeline. But also the positive, the silver lining, yeah, sure, it didn't land in a waterway, but the fact is that there was still massive damage caused to the ground. The cleanup is going to take years, and it's going to cost tens of millions of dollars. And I'm pretty sure it. Look, Colonial better, and that's what I'm saying. Colonial better be on the hook for all of it. Because we already know that. See, the Coke Industries doesn't care because it was determined in a court of law back in 2016 that they were not liable for anything that happened in the Birmingham, Alabama explosion, right? So the buck doesn't stop at the Koch brothers, right? Or the Koch brother now, but they don't care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, so what incentive do they have to fix anything or stop anything? They don't. They don't care because they're not liable. They're not on the hook. This pipeline can break down as many times as they want. They're Koch Industries. They have basically unlimited. They have unlimited revenue streams. Practically, they can throw whatever money they need to at it to put some bondo down whenever they need to fix it, right? And basically duct tape it and walk away. That's what it sounds like they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you can't tell me in a whole 2-year span you've checked 15% of your pipeline for cracks and then be surprised when a crack pops down and drops.
And this is an old
old
crack, like you said earlier. This is an old crack. Like this was a crack that they already repaired from what did you say, 2004?
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a crack that they knew was already there, and they weren't checking it. Like they weren't monitoring it to make sure that it was maintaining the repair. Like this.
Well, Colonial says last time they checked it, there was nothing wrong, but there's no documentation to say that they ever checked it, which is my biggest problem. Or not my biggest, but it's just like how many other big issues do we have to discuss? You know what I mean? Like, just not only the negligence part and the aging, the decrepit pipeline part, Colonial's constant revising their assessments because they just can't seem to actually just come out and say how bad the spill really was. And then we've got the piss poor regulations and the piss poor regulators, right, who are basically at best slapping Colonial on the wrist time and time again when they're averaging 3 incidents like every 2 months or something crazy, or 3 incidents in North Carolina over the last 20 years. They've averaged 3 incidents every 2 years, right? That's an insane pace, right? And there would be in no normal industry would that kind of failure just be accepted. But for some reason in the oil and pipeline industry, it's like, oh, so what? Who cares? So 2 things need to happen. And again, I really appreciate you guys for bringing me on so I can actually give a platform to this story.
Absolutely.
The things that needs to happen is that Colonial needs to be investigated, 100% investigated, top to bottom. They need to be audited 100% top to bottom from a record keeping standpoint as far as all their inspections. And I'm talking about all of them. Like they
Yeah.
need to pull out everything out of the last 20 to 30 years, right? It needs to be a massive, because you cannot have 272 incidents in your pipeline over the last 20 years. That's not acceptable, right? And so there needs to be a top to bottom audit of Colonial Pipeline, and there also needs a complete and total overhaul of regulations and reforming the PHMSA. That whole agency, especially with regards as to how they deal with pipeline spills, and how they deal with basically regulating and requiring the status of how these companies inspect and maintain their pipelines. Those regulations need to be clamped down and tightened, right? There's no excuse with the amount of money that Colonial makes and the amount of technology that is available to them, because the technology that they use to inspect these things is some pretty high tech stuff.
Yeah.
There's no excuse why they can't cover the entire pipeline in a year. I'm, or at least, or you can't at least cover the entire pipeline in 2 years' time, whatever. But 5 years is way too long. And I'm sorry, in 1 year, you should have to specify what stretches you've checked, and you should have to check them all for everything, not just check one section for corrosion, the next section for cracks, because 650 miles in a year, 150 miles in a year for cracks is unacceptable. It's not safe. It's not safe. And if this happens in another area of the country, what's the next one going to be? Like I said, it could be 1.5 million into the Missouri River.
Right.
And now we're talking a major environmental catastrophe, right? But it's because nobody paid attention now when it needs to be. Well, we can actually, like, this could have been so much worse, I understand, but that doesn't take away from how bad it was. And
no kidding.
we need to use this as a not only as a cautionary tale, but this should be the eye-opening story. This should be finally, I know it won't be, but I'm hoping this finally opens up the eyes of our politicians, of our populace, and understand that, yes, even though we know realistically we can't get rid of the pipelines, if they're going to operate, we have to clamp down on how they operate, and we need to clamp down on safety regulations, and we actually have to hold them accountable, which is what I'm trying to do here, which is what the guys, the team at in Charlotte at Fox 46 in Charlotte are trying to do. It's what you guys are trying to do. It's what we strive for in independent media. This is the type of journalism that is important, and so I'm just hoping that through our efforts and like I said, you guys amplifying the message, that we can finally get some attention to this story, and we can actually maybe start reforming it. At the very least, getting through some of these serious reform discussions over the U.S. pipeline system, because it's totally a mess.
Yeah, and I think, or not, I think, I agree with you 100% that Colonial within and of itself is a big deal, and it's actually terrifying to me that I didn't know about it, and it happened in August.
Yeah, they need to be brought before Congress.
Yes, they absolutely do. Yeah.
And then
no question.
You think about the vastness of the pipeline network in this country, and how many of those are corroded or cracked or
that we don't know about,
gone to
seed.
Who
knows?
Yeah, and this, we're talking about dumping. If these pipelines fail, we're talking about, like you said, millions of gallons getting just pumped into the earth,
into the environment.
Yeah. Which
is not good.
If you live in an area where you rely on well water, that's going to end up in your well water, and it's going to make you sick, or it's going to kill you.
And about as much of a problem as these companies have is saying, "Oh well, I know it's going to be a big bill. We'll clean it up," and then the regulators say, "Okay, that sounds good."
Yeah, strongly worded letter. Hey, have a good day. Yeah.
Oh, hey, you need to clean this up. Sure, yeah, we'll pay for it. All right, fine. As long as you pay for it, we're good. There's absolutely no incentive for them to, ever stop fucking up. So I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
this
and
is
Well, I know
sad.
the story is still developing too, so I'm hoping
Right.
that once as this keeps going, we can have you back on and we can talk about if
Sure.
you get the FOIA requests and all that stuff. I know
Mhm.
you have to go now,
Right.
but yeah, I would definitely love to have you back on as more as it kind of develops and we get some more information on it. But if you guys are watching this, tweet at your politicians. Doesn't matter where you are, who they are, tweet at them. Call their attention to it. Maybe they just don't know. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just don't know. So let's make some noise about this. Let's get people talking about it. Robbie, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your reporting too. You do amazing work. Everybody should be following your work. Tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter. Do you have a Substack yet? Because if you don't, you should.
Well,
and
like again, things,
let me just say this, that I follow Robbie, and I had my notifications set so I can see his tweets when they come up.
And you don't get them.
Funny enough, Twitter turned off my notifications for you. So
Thanks,
wow.
Twitter.
I'm gonna turn them back on, but
I knew that it would eventually come from me. They've been, because like
they
Misty,
did
like I
that
said,
with me and
they're gonna
Richard Medhurst too.
they're gonna start clamping down on public disclosure filing type guys, like stuff that I do. So that doesn't really surprise me. But
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
like again, thanks guys so much for having me on. For everybody watching, you can find this story is still developing. I'm still very much looking into this story, and I'm awaiting a lot of information, hopefully to come my way within the next couple of weeks. So definitely you can keep in touch with that story and a lot of the other political finance journey or journalism I'm doing. I'm keeping a really tight trail on the Biden cabinet and the picks and trailing their finances. Twitter at Roblet O'Fire, ROBLET O'Fire. Yes, I played off of the Harry Potter book. I know. But that's my Twitter. That's where a lot of my stuff breaks. That's where I do a lot of my work. I'm up all night on it usually. You can do a lot of my previous writing on Medium. I'm moving away from Medium almost all the time now. Like I might secondarily post stuff, but guys, YouTube is not doing anybody any favors. They've basically demonetized half of my colleagues at MCSC. So I'm really putting everything on Rockfin. I'm putting all my efforts into Rockfin. So I would definitely go check out Rockfin. Even if you don't check me out, check these two out because they're on Rockfin. Check out everybody. It's the way that actually creators can create without being stifled or muffled or in danger of losing their livelihood.
And you're on
there's that.
You're on rockfin.com/
same name as my Twitter.
Roblet
O'Fire.
Roblet O'Fire. Yep.
Yep.
I get a little
I do not have a
dyslexic when I look
Substack.
at that.
Yeah, I do not have a
You not
Substack.
have a
I've been thinking
Substack.
about
That's
it.
okay. I'll
I've
hit
been
you
thinking
up on
about it.
Rockfin. That's okay.
Yeah,
I'll
but
hit you up on
Rockfin,
Rockfin.
definitely.
Okay, so yeah, everybody follow Robbie on Twitter. Check out Rockfin, and we look forward to talking to you again once you have some more information for us. So thanks again for coming on.
Yeah. So everybody who's watching, our guest today has been Robbie Jaeger. He's an independent investigative journalist. He's the lead political finance reporter at MCSC Network. And you can find him on Twitter, as we said, at
Roblet O'Fire.
Roblet O'Fire. Okay.
Stay on Rockfin.
I don't know why that's so hard for me, but and then also on Rockfin, which is a platform that if you're not familiar with, you should definitely check out because it's hopefully going to take the place of YouTube and all the corporate nonsense that goes on with that. But you can follow Robbie on Rockfin at rockfin.com.
Robleto. Good Lord, dude.
Robleto Fire.
I need to change my Twitter probably.
No. I just need I need to learn the name.
Yeah.
But Robbie, thanks so much for joining us. And as Misty said, we'd definitely love to follow up with any developments in the story, as I'm sure there will be. So yeah, thanks again, and have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you guys soon. I'm hoping. You guys
all right.
Yep.
Take care.
Later, Tater.
Later.